Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The champagne glass didn't just break. It exploded. Shards of crystal rained down onto the pristine white tablecloth, mingling with the spray of crimson wine that looked far too much like blood in the dim chandelier light. Julian froze, his fingers still hovering over the stemware, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs as the heavy oak doors of the ballroom were kicked open with a violence that shook the floorboards. The orchestra died instantly, a discordant screech of a violin, the final sound before the silence of the predators took over. "Don't move," a voice commanded, low, raspy, and vibrating with a lethal kind of amusement. Julian turned, his breath catching in his throat. Standing at the entrance wasn't the security team his brother, Marcus, had promised would keep the peace. It was a phalanx of men in charcoal suits, moving with the synchronized fluidity of a wolf pack. And at their center stood Viktor Volkov, the demon of the East Harbor, the man his family was supposed to execute tonight. The setup had been perfect, or so Marcus had claimed. Invite the rival Don to the wedding as a peace offering, get him drunk, and put a bullet in his brain before the cake was cut. But as Julian looked around the room, he saw his brother's men already on the floor, disarmed and bleeding, while Marcus himself stood by the altar, his face drained of color. Viktor didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the trembling bride. His eyes, cold as Siberian ice and sharp as a scalpel, locked directly onto Julian. "The Vane family has a terrible habit of underestimating their guests," Viktor drawled, stepping over a groaning bodyguard. He held a suppressed pistol loosely at his side, as if it were a fashion accessory. "Did you really think I wouldn't smell the gunpowder on the invitations?" Marcus stepped forward, trying to salvage his bravado. "This is a misunderstanding, Volkov. If you leave now, I'm not leaving empty-handed," Viktor interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. He walked straight toward the head table. The guests parted like the Red Sea, terrified of being caught in the crossfire. Viktor stopped in front of Julian. The height difference was suffocating. Viktor towered over him, radiating a scent of expensive tobacco, gunpowder, and rain. He reached out, his leather-gloved hand gripping Julian's chin, forcing him to look up. "Marcus Vane owes me a life," Viktor said, his thumb brushing over Julian's trembling lower lip. "Since he values his own so dearly, I'll take the spare." "No," Julian whispered, the first sound he'd managed to make. "Marcus, help me." Marcus hesitated. That split-second hesitation was the sharpest knife in the room. He looked at the guns pointed at him, then at his younger brother. "Viktor, he knows nothing. Take the territory. Take the docks." "I have the docks," Viktor smirked, a cruel, beautiful expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Now I have your leverage." Before Julian could scream, Viktor spun him around, an arm like an iron band clamping across his chest, pinning his back against Viktor's hard, muscular chest. The cold barrel of the gun pressed against Julian's temple. "Walk, little bird," Viktor whispered into his ear, his lips brushing the shell of Julian's ear. "Or I paint your brother's wedding cake with your brains." The ride to the Volkov estate was a blur of neon lights and terrifying silence. Julian sat in the back of the armored SUV, his hands bound with zip ties, watching the city skyline retreat. Beside him, Viktor reviewed documents on a tablet, looking as calm as a CEO on a morning commute, completely ignoring the fact that he had just kidnapped the younger brother of the city's second most powerful crime lord. "Why me?" Julian asked, his voice shaking but gaining strength. He wasn't cut out for this life. He was a pianist, a student of the arts, the family failure who refused to hold a gun. "Marcus won't trade anything for me. I'm useless to the business." Viktor didn't look up. "You undervalue yourself, Julian. Or rather, you misunderstand the game. There is no game. He tried to kill you. You should have killed him." Viktor finally turned, closing the tablet. The interior light of the car cast deep shadows across his angular face, highlighting the sharp jawline and the predatory intelligence in his eyes. Killing Marcus today would start a war that burns the whole city down. I prefer to dismantle my enemies piece by piece. Humiliation is a slower, more potent poison than death. And I'm the humiliation? You are the weakness, Victor corrected. He reached out, and for a moment Julian flinched, expecting a strike. Instead, Victor's gloved finger traced the line of Julian's jaw, a touch that was possessive, almost intimate. Marcus projects an image of invulnerability. But everyone knows the Vane Family Trust Fund. The money that finances his guns requires 2 signatures. His and yours. Julian's blood ran cold. He had forgotten about the inheritance clause. You want my money. I have money, Victor scoffed. I want his paralysis. As long as I have you, he can't access the reserves to fight me. You are the chain around his neck. The car slowed, turning into a massive gated compound that looked more like a fortress than a home. Welcome to your cage, Julian. 3 weeks. Julian had been a prisoner in the penthouse for 3 weeks. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a sprawling, luxurious apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he could no longer touch. He had a grand piano he refused to play, a library he refused to read, and a wardrobe of silk clothes he refused to wear. He remained in the rumpled suit he'd been kidnapped in until the servants forcibly removed it while he slept, replacing it with soft linen loungewear that made him feel like a concubine. Every evening Victor returned. He would sit at the head of the long mahogany dining table, forcing Julian to eat with him. The dynamic was suffocating. Victor was the predator toying with his food. Julian was the prey refusing to die. You're losing weight, Victor noted one rainy Tuesday, cutting into a rare steak. The red juice ran onto the white porcelain. It displeases me. I'm not here to please you, Julian snapped, pushing his plate away. I'm a hostage. Hostages aren't supposed to be comfortable. Victor paused, his knife scraping against the plate. A harsh, grating sound. He stood up, the chair legs dragging against the floor. He walked around the table with the prowling grace of a jungle cat. He stopped behind Julian's chair. You think this is cruelty? Victor asked softly. His hands landed on Julian's shoulders, heavy and warm. He began to knead the tension there, his thumbs digging into the knots of muscle. Cruelty would be sending you back to a brother who hasn't answered a single one of my calls for negotiation. Julian stiffened. You're lying. Am I? Victor leaned down, his cheek pressing against Julian's hair. He hasn't offered a dime. He hasn't threatened retaliation. He's simply waiting. Perhaps he hopes I'll tire of you and dispose of the problem for him. He wouldn't, Julian whispered, though the doubt had been festering in his gut for days. Turn around, Victor commanded. When Julian didn't move, Victor spun the chair around. He braced his hands on the armrests, trapping Julian. Their faces were inches apart. For the first time, Julian saw something other than cold calculation in Victor's eyes. He saw a dark, burning curiosity. You are an artist? Victor murmured, his gaze dropping to Julian's hands. Long, slender fingers made for keys, not triggers. You create beauty in a world of rot. Why do you defend a man who treats you like an asset to be liquidated? Because he's my blood. Blood is just biology, Victor spat. Loyalty is a choice, and you are loyal to a ghost. Victor straightened, buttoning his suit jacket. Tonight, I have a gala to attend. A charity auction. Marcus will be there. Julian looked up, hope flaring in his chest. You're going to negotiate? No. Victor smiled, dangerous and sharp. I'm going to show him what he's lost. And you are coming with me. The gala was a sea of diamonds and deceit. The elite of the underworld mingled with politicians, pretending their wealth was clean. Julian felt exposed. Victor had dressed him in a suit of midnight blue velvet, fitted so perfectly it felt like a second skin. A diamond choker, thin, elegant, but unmistakably a collar, rested against his throat. Victor kept a hand on the small of his back at all times, a brand of ownership that burned through the fabric. They spotted Marcus near the champagne tower. He looked tired, his eyes darting around the room nervously. When he saw Julian, his expression wasn't relief. It was fear. "Marcus," Julian breathed, instinctively stepping forward. Victor's grip tightened on his waist, holding him back. "Watch." Marcus saw them approach. He didn't rush to embrace his brother. Instead, he signaled his bodyguards to form a wall. "Volkov," Marcus hissed, keeping his voice low. "You have some nerve bringing him here." "I take my possessions where I please," Victor replied smoothly, taking a sip of champagne. "He cleans up well, doesn't he? Much better than when he was rotting in your shadow." "Julian," Marcus said, his voice hard. "Did you tell him about the accounts?" Julian blinked, feeling like he'd been slapped. "What? No. Marcus, The access codes, Julian. Did you give them to him?" Marcus interrupted, his eyes wild. "That's all that matters. If you gave him the codes, you're dead to me." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Julian stared at his brother, the man he had worshipped, the man he had tried to protect. There was no concern for his safety, no question of his well-being. Just the money. "He didn't give me anything," Victor said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I didn't have to ask. Because unlike you, Marcus, I don't need to steal from my family to be powerful." Victor turned to Julian, his expression softening imperceptibly. "Do you see now?" Tears pricked Julian's eyes, hot and angry. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw a coward in an expensive suit. Then he looked at Victor, the monster, the kidnapper, the man who had fed him, clothed him, and, in his own twisted way, valued him. Julian took a deep breath, the sorrow in his chest hardening into something brittle and sharp. He stepped closer to Victor, turning his back on Marcus. "I want to go home," Julian said softly. Victor's eyes widened slightly, a flash of surprise breaking his stoic mask. "To the Vane Manor?" "No." Julian looked up at Victor, his gaze steady. "To the penthouse." A slow, victorious smile spread across Victor's face. It wasn't the cruel smirk from the wedding. It was the satisfaction of a conqueror who had just won the war without firing a shot. He wrapped his arm around Julian's shoulders, pulling him tight against his side. "As you wish," Victor said to Julian, before casting one last, withering look at Marcus. Checkmate. The dynamic shifted the moment the elevator doors opened into the penthouse. Julian didn't retreat to his room. He walked to the liquor cabinet, poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey, and turned to face Victor. His hands were steady. "You knew," Julian said. "You knew he would react like that." Victor accepted the glass Julian offered. He loosened his tie, the first sign of relaxation he'd shown all night. "I suspected. Men like Marcus are predictable. They love power more than people." "And men like you?" Julian asked, taking a step closer. The air between them crackled, charged with the adrenaline of the night and the shattered remnants of Julian's old life. Victor set his glass down. He reached out, his hand cupping Julian's face again. This time, Julian leaned into the touch. "Men like me," Victor murmured, his thumb tracing the line of Julian's lips, "are possessive. We protect what is ours. And we destroy anything that tries to take it away. Am I yours?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Victor didn't answer with words. He closed the distance, his mouth crashing down on Julian's. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It tasted of whiskey and violence, desperate and hungry. Julian grasped Victor's lapels, pulling him closer, surrendering to the darkness he had been fighting for weeks. He had been stolen, yes, but looking at the fire in Victor's eyes, Julian realized he didn't want to be returned. The trap at the wedding had failed to kill the alpha. Instead, it had given him exactly what he needed. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian realize his true worth and take his place beside the king, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a family member who valued money over your life? Or would you seek revenge? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,